and welcome to The Rest is Politics US with me, Katty K.
And me, Anthony Scaramucci.
Anthony, we're being very Euro on The Rest is Politics US this week because you're in Greece, I'm in Cannes, where I went to it. By the way, you have a big fan. I went to a dinner and there was a member of the British royal family, a princess, and I was introduced to speak, and I suddenly heard this gasp of delight, and it was this princess saying, "Oh my God, I love the show. I really love Anthony." So look, I think we're going to upgrade your refuge from America possibilities.
See that? I can hide in one of the castles?
Exactly. Yeah. I'm now going to start a kind of, crowdsourcing, but if you haven't got a castle, get to the back of the queue. Because Anthony has high standards, as we can see from his lovely room in Athens.
I do have high standards. I may be more posh than you.
Exactly.
Remember, when I call you posh, it could be projecting, Katty. Remember that.
Projecting or confession. That's
yes.
It's always
Amen.
that. And there you are on the Athens Riviera, just trying to make everybody jealous.
What are we talking about today?
On today's podcast, we are going to look at why Black and Hispanic voters may be warming to Donald Trump, whether Democrats should be worried about that as we head into the November election. And of course, it comes after Joe Biden this week announced a new policy that would protect hundreds of thousands of undocumented spouses of American citizens from deportation, which follows the earlier order earlier this month, shutting the border against asylum seekers. So he's kind of trying to have it both ways, it looks like, with on immigration, appeal to progressives, but also appeal to the centrists who are worried about the border. So we'll talk about all of that. In the second half of the program, I think this is the week to look at presidential debate, right? And what the prep actually looks like. The first debate of the election campaign comes up next week. We want to have a look at what we can learn from history about how important these debates are. But I really want to get into what the preparations are looking like. Joe Biden has flown already to Camp David and is prepping now until the next debate. So we'll get into how the two men go about debate prep. But first of all, let's talk about this coalition, Anthony, this border move that President Biden instituted at the beginning of this month. And then this week, he follows that up with this move to protect undocumented spouses of American citizens. So people who have come into the country illegally and are married to American citizens are now going to get some respite and won't necessarily be deported. This is clearly a move to appeal to progressives in the Democratic Party who didn't like him shutting down on the border, and a way to say to them, look, I hear that you're angry. I don't know if he's trying to have it both ways. I don't know if this looks like the Biden campaign being a little unclear on immigration. What is their position? Are they trying to shut down the border, or are they trying to help people who are in the country illegally? I think what Joe Biden's team are saying is, look, if you're out of the country, we're going to try and stop you coming in. We're going to protect the border. But if you're in the country already and you've been here for a long time, you're married to an American, then we'll try and help you work and live in the country legally. I don't know how it washes with the progressives, and I don't know whether it just looks a bit muddled. What's your reading on it, Anthony, on that?
Yeah, so I want to ask you a question, if you don't mind, because I know you're a great journalist. Do you think he's gotten a green light from the left, the hard left progressives? Some people in the United States call them the woke progressives, if you will, to tack to the middle? Or do you think he's doing this on his own, not worried about losing them or having them disaffect or not vote? Because he has an issue in Dearborn County. We can talk about Dearborn, Michigan in a second, related to the Arab community. But I'm going to tell you why what he did is a brilliant move in my mind. But I just want to understand from your mind, do you think he's been given a green light, or do you think he's doing this unilaterally?
So I think Joe Biden's instincts would be to help migrants in the country, particularly people here illegally. When he was in the Obama administration, Barack Obama tried to help the parents of kids who had been born in the United States. The parents were in the country illegally. The kids were born here and therefore were American citizens. The Obama-Biden administration tried to help those people. And I think Joe Biden's instinct is to try to help people who are here. But when he shut down the border, that felt to me like a move to the center, and to try and mitigate some of the anger there has been over the US border. But he got blowback from progressives in the country. Now, are those progressives going to go somewhere else? No. Most of those progressives are going to turn out and vote for him anyway. A few of them may defect to RFK Jr., the third party candidate, Kennedy. But most of the progressives are going to vote for Biden. They haven't got another home to go to. So I think in that sense, you're probably right. He has a green light, but he's still clearly with this move coming just a couple of weeks after the border move felt like appeasement.
Okay, so just two comments, and this always happened when I sat in on these campaign strategy meetings, and you were tacking to the middle for the purposes of trying to get the independents who are ultimately going to decide the election. What we found in a lot of these campaigns is some of the people on the hard right, at least again, I was a Republican, so they defected. And I'll give you an example. In the Romney campaign, 2012, the evangelicals did not show up for Mitt Romney. Had they showed up proportionally for like they did for John McCain or for George W. Bush, I'm not saying he would have won the election because he lost by a wide margin, but it would have been a lot closer of an election. So they're always worried about not that they're going to vote for the other side, but they just don't turn out and vote. But I think the move with this exception on marriage is a brilliant one. And let me explain why. He's going to come into the fall. He's going to say you have one side that wants to deport 15 million people, and they want to have a Handmaid's Tale armored car going door to door, house to house to pull people out. You and I, unfortunately, are old enough to remember the Elian Gonzalez situation with the Clinton administration, where they had to, unfortunately, deport him. The child did not want to leave his aunt and uncle. They had to bring the SWAT team in to pull him out of the house. It is not an experience that Americans want. And I think Joe Biden is trying to tell people with this move, if you're here, we're going to make it work for you. I think they need to do a better job, however, on explaining what you and I talked about last week or 2 weeks ago about the economy. The 15 million people that are here are actually helping the economy. They're adding wages. They're adding tax revenue to the base. They're paying your Social Security taxes. They're keeping us from being upside down demographically like most of the Western nations. And so it's not a great argument to make on Fox News, the hard right conservatives who, because they are so fearful, they're going to steal our jobs. There's lots of xenophobia in the country and lots of isolationism. But I think it's a great narrative for his campaign, Katty, and I think it's going to work for him.
Yeah, I think it's something that we could hear more of from Democrats. I think it's something that we could, as I said last week, the business community is not making that case. People who are in favor of immigration could be making more strongly the Democratic case. I want to look, that coalition that the Democrats have always had, is it as solid this time around with Black and brown voters as it has been in previous elections? So there are two things you have to do, right, to win an election in the United States. You've got to, as you've just said, keep your base together. Your base has to show up and vote for you. And you have to reach as many of those people in the middle, the swing voters, as you can. The assumption has been on the Democratic side that their base is solid, that they've got the progressives, that they've got Black and brown voters, and so they can focus on those independent voters particularly. There are questions in this election campaign because of some of the polling numbers, and we can get into that a little bit, about whether Democrats are losing some of those Black and brown voters. And I think the Hispanic vote is particularly interesting because you've got a very different Hispanic vote. When you were running the Romney campaign or working on the Romney campaign back in 2012, the Hispanic vote was a lot of people who had come into the country even then, more recently. But since 2012, even in a couple of election cycles, 12 years, the nature of the Hispanic vote is changing. So here's why. Every 30 seconds in the US, a young Latino turns 18, becomes of voting age. The Latino population in America is young. And many of them are people who were born in the United States. They are third or fourth generation. It's their grandparents who came here in the 1960s. That was the huge big wave when you got people coming into the US. And these are now American born. They speak English as their primary language. They may speak Spanglish at home, right? This mixture of Spanish and English. But when you look at them in terms of issues, these are people who pollsters are saying, and people who are studying this. There's a great book on this, by the way, a guy called Mike Madrid called the book is The Latino Century, and he lays out this argument. You look at these young Hispanics, they are socially liberal on things like abortion. They're socially liberal on gun rights, for example, gun control. But when it comes to the border, they want the border shut down. They actually sound more like white Americans than they do like their Hispanic grandparents and great-grandparents. So if you're trying to reach that group of Hispanics, your message has to be, I think, a little bit what the Biden campaign was doing. It's not necessarily true that when the Biden campaign shuts the border like they tried to the other day by limiting asylum opportunities for people coming into the border, that may play well with this young group of Hispanic voters. It's interesting to me how the Hispanic population, I know that we've always seen it as a monolith, that Cubans are the same as Venezuelans, are the same as Mexicans, and clearly they're not. They have very different priorities. But you now have a kind of generational thing amongst Hispanic voters, which people who study this are looking at more closely.
I want to add a paragraph to what you're saying. I think it's a brilliant analysis, but I want to take it one step further into the African American community or the Black community. The Black community is not omnibus either.
Right.
You have immigrant blacks that are coming in from Africa or from the islands. You have fully assimilated blacks. You have several generation blacks whose great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents were slaves. And you have a very interesting collection that you can no longer call omnibus. But what you can talk about in our society is the sociology of assimilation. And I'll just tell a personal story. My grandfather on my mother's side, actually born in the United States. They have to go back to Italy because somebody is sick. So he's an American citizen, born in the United States. He goes back to Italy for 10 years. He returns to the United States at the age of 10. And him and my great-grandfather, they find the United States to be nativistic towards them, meaning, at that time, it was Italian to go back to the country that you came from. Right. At that time, there were signs in the storefronts that said Nina, which meant no Italians need to apply for the job. And so, they ended up doing construction or the day worker jobs and things like that to create money. And they weren't fully assimilated. In the mid-1900s, the 1905 period, Teddy Roosevelt signed legislation that for immigration purposes, Italian Americans or Italians were to come into the country as non-Caucasian. So when they were filling out quotas, so that means non-white, obviously. And so this bothered the Italian American community, and especially my grandfather. He didn't like it. He felt he was European. This was at a time where, hey, white and black and all of this racial segregation was in the country. And so it's 4 generations later for the Italian Americans. They see themselves as white, Katty, and very large blocks of the Italian American community voting for Donald Trump. I'm not saying all of them, but I'm just trying to explain the genealogy and the sociology of American assimilation. You go 1, 2, 3 generations, you think you're American. You look in the mirror. Which is what
we're seeing happen, right? We're seeing this happen with these young Hispanic kids.
You look in the mirror. I had dinner here in Greece last night. One of my friends is with me. He's a Greek American. I said, the Greeks are much more tied to this country than the Italian Americans, the Greek Americans. I said, why is that? He says, I'm a first generation kid. My father was born here in Greece.
Right.
Was your father born in the United States or was he born in Italy? My father was born in the United States. So was my mom. And so we've lost some of the connectivity to the old world. And this is happening in the Latin community. And this is very, very important to explain to people why America is different from Europe, why America is different from Asia. You come here to America based on an idea, and you're expecting your family to fully assimilate. And when you do, guess what you look like? You look like the average American voter. And I think the Biden campaign strategy now is, you know what? We got to make this seismic change. We got to start adjusting
right
to how these people see themselves as opposed to the way we see them.
Yeah, I think it's increasingly with these younger, particularly with these younger Hispanic voters, it's about class, not race. It's about where do I
100%.
identify socially, where do I identify economically? I mean, that figure, you know
100%.
this from the I remember the post-mortem that you guys did after Romney lost the election in 2012. And the argument was, we must expand the Republican Party. And that figure I just gave you, every 30 seconds, a Hispanic voter turns 18 and becomes a voter. That if those Hispanics were all going to vote Democratic, which is what the Democratic Party used to think, that would be terrifying for Republicans. I mean, that is the end of the Republican majority ever. But then it turns out that actually those young Hispanic voters are more like young white voters. Some of them are voting Democratic and some of them are voting Republican. Actually, what we're starting to see is that a lot of them are pretty populist. So this was interesting. I went through some of the numbers. In many of the precincts that Trump won, the kind of little micro areas that Donald Trump won in 2016, in the primary campaigns, Bernie Sanders had won them. So these are Hispanic voters who are voting for Bernie Sanders on the left and Donald Trump on the right. But what they're voting for is anti-establishment. We don't like either party. We think the parties are corrupt. We think the system is rigged against us. And they vote for these populist figures, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump. And I don't know that those young people are necessarily going to look at Joe Biden. And I know historically Hispanics, even when they've polled as drifting away from the Democratic Party, they've come back in the election to vote for the Democrats. I think this is a new group of voters. It's not voters who used to vote one way and now are voting another way. This is a new group of voters who are looking and saying, I don't really like either of these parties.
I agree with you. And I think it's going to require a change by both parties eventually. So the Republicans would have been wiser to have adopted some of those things that we discussed in 2012 and made the party look like the beautiful mosaic of the American people.
Right. Less nativist.
But this is it. They're going hard. And now they're saying to themselves, okay, if we can get this, if we can win it, we're going to really whiteify the government. Here's our Project 2025. We're going to whiteify the government. And if they don't get it, which I predict that they won't, and we could discuss why, even though the polls are very close, but if they do get it, I do think it spells trouble for the American democracy. If they don't get it, they're going to have to retrench and they're going to have to recreate that party. They won't be able to be successful in 2028 with this strategy.
But this is why the dream, and you're the predictor, not me, but let's go for it. The dream of the Republican Party would be to have a Black or brown Hispanic president, right? So this is the argument for Donald Trump nominating a vice president who is Marco Rubio, Tim Scott. And if they could be the party that has a Black or brown vice president, then they feel they can shore up that group. But it may be that there's some very interesting polling on Black voters suggesting that Black voters who are interested in Donald Trump are less likely to vote for him if he nominates a Black vice presidential candidate, which I found super fascinating. But that is not what's going to sway them. I think the idea of kind of tokenism is not what people are interested in.
Okay, so let me spell more trouble for you. So if Barack Obama had a white wife, he would have got elected president of the United States?
Well, we've talked about this before, Anthony. No, I think that's a problem for him.
So I don't. At some point, I hope this is like a sports podcast where you and I are going through the players, and we do I go through the vice presidential selections, and then we do color commentating. Okay, but there's no way this guy's going with a white guy. Well, let me tell you something. He's such a narcissist. He can't pick Tim Scott and then have somebody say to him, "Well, Tim Scott helped you with the Black vote, and so that's why you won the presidency." No. You have to understand something. I won the presidency because of me, Donald J. Trump. I didn't win the presidency because of who I picked. I'm going to pick this nondescript backseater Okay. I'm looking for Mike Pence 2.0. And so we have to go over that at some point. But that's what I honestly think.
He may think that Marco Rubio helps him with Hispanic voters. Marco Rubio, of course, is Cuban American. That is very different from being Mexican American. The two have very little in common at this point. So I don't know that it would even help him with the Hispanic vote.
Katty, Marco Rubio called Donald. Look at. Okay, I don't know. I'm just trying to looks better in the mirror. Look, this is Donald Trump's hands. Okay. I mean, Donald Trump has microscopic hands. It's weird when you look at his body and you look at these little tiny hands coming out of those cuff-linked shirts. You're like, okay, this is a little weird. The guy's sensitive about it. Marco called it out on the campaign. There is no way he's picking Marco Rubio. There's no way because he doesn't want that replay on all the liberal media.
It would be nonstop.
Of course.
On all of the media.
Yeah, he's not going to go with that.
We're going to take a break and then come back and talk about debate prep. I realize we have not really spoken very much about the black vote, which is super interesting. And the polling on black voters is complicated at the moment. Some polling suggests that black men are drifting away from Donald Trump. The Pew Research Foundation, which is the polling I always look to, it really is nonpartisan. It's very thorough. They take much bigger sample sizes, suggests that actually the Democrats still have a huge amount of black support, and there hasn't been very much drift in black support. So, I mean, I know that the Biden campaign is hoping that both Hispanic voters and black voters will come home to the Democratic Party in November, and they are looking at black men who have a history of being a little bit more Republican. 25% of black men voted for Richard Nixon. So there has always been a bit more of a Republican streak amongst black men than black women. I think Donald Trump only got 4% of the black female vote in 2020. So black women are very firmly in the Democratic camp. But they are also pretty confident that the black vote will come home. There's lots to talk about here, and we'll do a deeper dive on black voters at some other time. And let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and talk about debate prep. Welcome back to The Rest is Politics US with me, Katty Kay.
And I'm Anthony Scaramucci.
And Anthony, in this half, we wanted to talk about debate prep, because this is debate prep week, right? We are a week out from the first presidential debate. And this is the time when both candidates, in theory, are holed up doing practice sessions, going through their talking points. Joe Biden is in Camp David. He's come off a busy period. He was at the G7 meetings in Italy. He went to a fundraiser in California. And then his team tell me now it is rest and prep, rinse and repeat. And that is what they're going to be doing until the debate, because they realize this. Now, historically, debates haven't mattered terribly much. You get somebody who wins, but the data suggests that when it comes to the actual election, they haven't made a huge amount of difference. But my understanding from the Biden campaign is they do think this is a very big moment, that for the American public to see the two candidates up on stage together, this is a choice election. Do you want Joe Biden or do you want Donald Trump? And that's why they were pushing to have this in June. And they think this is the moment that those people who have not really woken up to the election, not woken up to the fact that this is a choice between these two guys, are going to wake up to this. And I've spoken to both. I spoke to both the Biden and the Trump campaign this week ahead of recording this, and they both sound kind of pretty confident about it. That's what they're telling the press, that they think this is a good moment for their guy. What do you think Donald Trump is going through this week?
So just a couple of things. The debate is going to be televised on CNN on June 27th. It's 9 p.m. Eastern time on the East Coast of the United States, or 1 a.m. UK time. We're going to be going live on YouTube immediately after the debate with our feedback and our sort of analysis. Of course, if you're in bed by then, it'll be on our regular podcast feed when you wake up on Friday morning. So just a public service announcement on the debate. But here's the thing I would say, Katty, I don't agree with the debates don't matter, because in 2020, Trump dropped 5 points in the polls. He never recovered from those two debates. And I know what's going on with the Trump team right now. They're showing him video of him. This is like Tom Brady, or you pick a footballer in the UK. They're showing him video of how he missed the play, or showing a video how he missed the wide receiver. And they're explaining to Donald Trump that you were talking wildly over him. They're practicing Trump getting his mic shut off as he goes into one of his full-on stem winders. And they're trying to tell Donald Trump, you can't do what you did in 2020. Now, he hates debate prep. Kellyanne Conway scheduled debate prep in 2016. He used to take it out of the schedule. She finally said, okay, you know what? I'm going to have a lunch with Donald Trump. And she would sit down in his office and have lunch with him. And she'd have the debate prep in like these little index cards. And she'd try to have a debate prep with him over lunch. And he would look at her and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. This feels like debate prep. I don't want to do debate prep. So the President Trump, does not like debate prep.
So he doesn't do the classic thing then that most presidential candidates do of standing with a surrogate who stands in and pretends to be that president, and he does at the end. He will certainly do that before he shows up on June 27th. Somebody will play Joe Biden.
Okay, I don't know the number of times Hillary Clinton did that before debate prep, but I guarantee that it was more than Donald Trump did that standing in front of the podium.
And Joe Biden does it a lot. He has a lot of people who come in and pretend to be Donald Trump, and he games out the whole thing.
Okay, so now Governor Christie has met with the Biden team to discuss debate prep and to discuss with them how Trump does his debate prep. But I think Anita Dunn, who's an unsung...
Who is the White House advisor, who's a campaign advisor to Joe Biden.
Yeah. So I think she's an unsung hero and an unsung genius of the Democratic Party. Not a lot of people know who she is, but she was heavily involved in that debate prep in 2020. And she said something very insightful to me on a COVID Zoom call in midsummer of 2020 that I'll share with people. She said, when Trump's on the stage with a younger guy and he's berating them and he's calling them the nicknames and they're trying to fight back, their stature, image-wise from an age perspective, doesn't work for them. But what we're going to do is, if Trump engages like that with Joe Biden, who is a contemporary of his, a few years older, same height, he was also the former vice president of the United States, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to rebut him. We're just going to let him ventilate. And you remember this moment. I remember this moment. Our producers remember the moment where Biden said, will you shut up, man? Will you shut up, man? And it was a moment of genuineness where everybody looked at each other and said, okay, this guy's Looney Tunes. The other guy's an elder statesman trying to pull the country back together after COVID. And those debates mattered, Katty, and Trump never recovered from those debates.
I agree. That first 2020 debate, which I can almost hardly think about because it was so crazy to cover. It was not a debate. I mean, it was, as I've said before, it was a shit show. I think that did clearly hurt Donald Trump. And this time around, even if the numbers of people, every cycle, the numbers of people who watch it live on television is declining in the US, it's all about the clips afterwards. It's about that moment that you just described, the moment that comes to define who these two candidates are. I'm interested in the format, though, in this one, because for the first time ever, it's a debate of first. The first time ever the debate is held in June and not in the autumn, closer to the election. And the first time that the microphones are going to actually be muted. So the format's going to be each candidate gets 2 minutes to answer the question, during which time the other guy's microphone is muted, and there is a 1 minute rebuttal. If you are not speaking, your microphone is muted. Now, the Biden campaign pushed for this format. I've spoken to enough people around Donald Trump now to start wondering whether actually that was a mistake. Because the reason Joe Biden won that debate in 2020 was because of what you've just described. There was Donald Trump interrupting him all the time. This time around, Donald Trump is not going to be able to interrupt him, at least not in terms of what the public is going to hear. His microphone's going to be muted. So does that mean then that Donald Trump is not going to look like the kind of crazy, rude, bullying interrupter because his mic is going to be muted? I mean, the caveat to that is, of course, that if he does talk in that 2 minutes, Joe Biden will be able to hear it. And will that rattle Joe Biden? But the audience won't be hearing it. I'm less sure that this format is the dream format that the Biden campaign thought it was going to be.
Well, but let me
Might
push
be nice
it back
for the audience.
But let me push it back on you for a second. Suppose they see the president as malapropping. They see the president as sometimes getting disorganized in his sentences. And maybe they want him to talk for 2 minutes and they don't want him to talk for more than that. Maybe they've got it, maybe they've got it in a position where, okay, he's great for 2 minutes. He can get a lot of sound bites out. It'll help us on TikTok. It'll help us on social media. We're 3-1 on advertising spend with Meta versus the Trump campaign. They're spending their money on legal fees. We're out there in social media, and we're going to practice with Joe Biden 2-minute sound bites that we're going to cut, clip, and broadcast on social media. So we don't really see this as a debate as much as we see this as a soundbite machine for Joe Biden post-debate. Just throwing that out at you in terms of what their strategy might be.
And I think that's clearly what they're going to do. And they're going to focus on policy. We know that he's getting a lot of, he's doing quite a classic traditional debate prep up in Camp David. He's going through the policy. He's timing his answers to be 2 minutes. I think that's where there may be a little concern because Joe Biden tends to give longer answers. And then he'll be up against a surrogate who stands in for Donald Trump. I don't know who that surrogate is. I've asked around, but I haven't managed to get an answer on who that is at the moment. But we know that there have been various surrogates who stand in and played Donald Trump. What they need to do in that debate prep session on the Biden side is have that Donald Trump figure go after Joe Biden personally, try to get under Joe Biden's skin. That's what Donald Trump is going to do. He's going to.
Will he bring up Hunter Biden?
He may well do. I mean, I don't know that's a very good question. How does Donald Trump get under Joe Biden's skin? He goes after him on his record. He goes after him on inflation. He goes after him on the border. He goes after him on the wars. America's now involved in these wars. So he goes after him on issues. Does he also go after him on Hunter Biden? That might be a way. And that's what the Biden campaign will be prepping for. If he comes after you on your son, Mr. President, you need to not get rattled. So both sides think this is an opportunity because they both think, from my conversations with both teams, they think this is an opportunity for them because they want the country to see the other candidate as they are. So the Biden campaign wants Trump to be his most extreme version of himself. The Trump campaign wants exactly the same thing. They want Biden to be the most extreme version of himself. And that is how they think they're going to win it. And they think they get there by needling each other. One thing, okay, this is interesting. One person from the Trump campaign pointed out to me that one thing that they are going to be prepping Donald Trump on is his facial expressions. Because even if the audience can't see him, remember they have that split screen image. It's these two guys, one is talking and the other one you're just looking at. And he said, if I was in Donald Trump's ear over the next few days, I would say to him, watch your facial expressions. When you're off mic, watch what you're doing.
All right. So I because, I'm a very sensitive and very shy and
terribly introverted. I do worry. I worry.
You're bringing me out of my shell, but
I know
you've also sent me to my therapist because I've never gotten a trivia question right on this podcast. So I'm going to fire one out at you now. Ready?
Good.
I'm going to say the words Kimoy and Matsu. What are those two words? What do they mean to you? They mean anything to you? Kimoy and Matsu.
I feel like they're associated with Iwo Jima or something.
Okay.
Second World War.
All right. So you see that? So you're probably going to win on Jeopardy if you were playing American Jeopardy.
I've been on Jeopardy.
I'm sure you won. You won.
I came second, unfortunately. I'd never seen Jeopardy before when I agreed to be on it, but that was a mistake.
Okay. But so Kimoy and Matsu were relevant to the 1960 debate. And you're going to say, what is this guy talking about? John Kennedy debating the vice president of the United States. He needed that debate because he needed to show that he could handle himself presidentially versus Richard Nixon. And they were debating about Quemoy and Matsu, which were two islands off the coast of Taiwan. Remember, we had a full-on Truman Doctrine going in the United States. We were fighting a Cold War with the Russians, but we drew a very red line in the sand with Chairman Mao related to Taiwan, and we did not want any military on the two islands of Quemoy and Matsu. How do I know this? I went back this week and watched that debate. And why am I bringing this up? We were talking with great granularity about American policy. We were talking with great granularity about the direction that the country was going. We weren't saying things like little Marco, sleepy Joe Biden, tiny hands Donald Trump. We were not doing that 60 years ago or 64 years ago. And I'm worried, Katty. I'm worried, Katty K, because we've lost our sense for history, and we've lost this direction. Governor Romney tried to warn people about Russia. You remember that debate? It was the last debate. He was sitting down. I was at that debate. I was in the second row. Of course, we all went into the spin room. I'd like you to tell people what the spin room is like before we depart. But I'm just telling you, we don't do that anymore. There's no granularity or substance in these debates. And if you say that to somebody, they laugh. They say, well, the American people don't want that. This is an entertainment contest. This is a popularity contest. This is no longer a hiring decision. It's not like a board at a public company. Here are the resumes. Who are we hiring to be CEO?
I mean, they were, even in that 1960 debate, there was some kind of, debate tricks going on, right? That was the debate where John F. Kennedy and Nixon were standing there and Nixon starts sweating. The first debate, of course, had been in Chicago. And then the second debate was in Washington, D.C., in the studios of the famous television show Meet the Press. The Kennedy team had made sure that the temperature was set higher than the Nixon team wanted it. And that made Nixon sweat. So they had that capacity to try it. But you're right. It was a lot more serious. And I followed you round all of those Romney Obama debates. I went to all of them in St. Louis and then in Denver and then in Florida. And they were more serious. And actually, Mitt Romney was roundly, laughed at for saying that Russia represented the greatest foreign policy threat facing the United States, and he turned out to have been right. I mean, he was on the money. It didn't seem to be fashionable at the time. And then, of course, you come out into the spin room, which is where you were in the front row. I was in the press pen.
I paid for that seat. I paid for that seat, Kat. That was a lot of money going to that campaign.
And then then you come out and talk to all of the journalists afterwards. You're right that I don't think, certainly the 2020 debate was not a serious debate. The American public was massively ill-served by that performance. What they have tried to do with this debate is give themselves a format where there is room for more seriousness. And it's possible that we will do, Anthony. I mean, I think it's possible that in that 2 silent minutes, Joe Biden will give thoughtful expositions of policy, and Donald Trump will have gone away and talked about policy, and he will have 2 minutes to talk about what he will do for the United States. I mean, it could be that the format actually, I don't know how it works better for Joe Biden or Donald Trump, and maybe the Trump team is right, but it could be that the American public is better served by this format.
No, I agree. And I just want to say something about us being human. These are 2 human beings. Donald Trump had COVID in the first debate. We all know that now. That affected him. And I went back. Robert Dallek wrote a great book about John Kennedy called The Unfinished Life. And here's what Kennedy did for debate prep. He went up to the roof of the hotel and he had a mirror, and he tanned himself using a mirror. He then got the injections in his back from a guy called Dr. Feelgood. It was like a form of amphetamines and some Novocaine for his back. There's some suggestions that he was visited by a call girl, although that's not completely confirmed. That was Kennedy's prep on the day of the debate. Richard Nixon had phlebitis, and he came out of the car and he smashed his leg. He had phlebitis in his leg, and he smashed his leg coming out of the car, entering the hotel. He stacked himself with books like The Nerd at the High School as opposed to the high school quarterback, and he had a fever going into that debate. And so when they showed up at the debate prep, Kennedy said, do you want makeup? Kennedy was bright tan. He said, no, I don't need the makeup. Nixon did not want the press to say that he needed it, so he didn't take it. He looked ghastly. If you heard the debate on the radio. Which is also
why he was sweating, right? Because of the fever. I mean, it's partly because the Kennedy team wanted the temperature turned up in the room.
So these are human beings, okay? How are they going to, who feels what on June 27th during the day? Do they feel energized? Barack Obama, there's a very famous scene. Valerie Jarrett told me this, his senior advisor. She knocked on the door to his hotel room. during one of the John McCain debates in 2008. Are you ready? Obama gave that smile, the best smile in American politics since Jack Kennedy, and said, I got this. And when he closed the door on her, she's like, he's going to win this debate. He was clear thinking, in a very healthy position, and he was very versatile in terms of what he knew and how to handle himself on the debate stage. So this is a human experience as much as anything else.
And then you have to remember that the impact of the debate, right? So I remember one of those debates, the first debate between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. Everybody assumed Barack Obama was going to win. And actually, Mitt Romney did really well. And so that then pushed Barack Obama to prep harder for the next debate. It changed his performance. He had to up his game. I wonder what happens after this debate. If Donald Trump is widely seen to have been the winner of this debate, then there will be a lot of hand-wringing on the Democratic side, because a lot of the Biden camp have been telling reporters like me, this is a big moment for us. This is important. We think this is going to show the country that the choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump means they have to go for Joe Biden, because Donald Trump will come out there as crazy Donald Trump. If he doesn't, if he's disciplined and he comes out with his talking points and he's widely seen to have won, then I wonder about the kind of hand-wringing and the anxiety that's going to happen on the Democratic side.
I know we have to go, but I have to ask you this last question, because you talked to the Trumpers. The Trumpers are always beating the drum that Joe Biden's going to drop out after this debate. They made it so early.
Not dropping
We've got to make that very clear to people. Joe Biden is not dropping, but he's going to run through the tape at the end of this thing. But it's just interesting how they are constantly chanting that, which is a little bit of projection on their side, because in addition to Joe Biden malapropping all over the country, so is Donald Trump. He's telling people, Ronnie Johnson, the doctor was Ronnie Jackson. I'm a genius. I passed my cognitive test. Ask Ronnie Johnson. No, that's not the name of the doctor guy. You know what I mean? So we're all over the map with these two. It'll be very interesting to see what happens this week.
And the other thing that's happening is there's a little bit of kind of slight dog whistle happening on Fox News at the moment about, is Joe Biden going to be on something? The guy we saw at the State of the Union was hyper-caffeinated or something, or he's on caffeine pills.
Yeah, they like that too.
Slight kind of implication that Joe Biden will be on
he's dropping out, he's on drugs. Right.
He won't be. Joe Biden doesn't even drink, a glass of wine, which actually a lot of presidents don't. That's another interesting episode. We'll do that episode one time. How many presidents don't drink?
Trump's not a drinker. We know that.
Trump is not a drinker. No, there'll be Coke, Diet Coke going into this one. We have to leave it there, but we'll be back next week with, as Anthony said, our special episode, which will stream live on YouTube after the debate with both of our reactions, and see whether the American public has been well served by the 90 minutes of debate that they will see between the two candidates. We'll be back next week. It was good to be here.
This is The Rest is Politics US. Thank you so much for joining me, Anthony Scaramucci, and Katty K. We'll see you next week.